During the 1930s, the New York-based Socialist Party of America was facing a lot of internal troubles. There were two factions within the party that were vying for control. The so-dubbed Old Guard, older members of the party that had maintained reformism and focused their attention on elections, and on the other side, we had the militant faction, the younger revolutionary socialists that wanted to transition away from electoralism. One of the things that they fought about was a proposed declaration of principles against any war and opposition to bogus democracy of capitalist parliamentarism, which the Old Guard perceived as anarchistic and communistic, but the resolution was overwhelmingly adopted, so the Old Guard, such as former state representative August Claessens, felt the best route was to leave and form a separate organization known as the Social Democratic Federation to maintain some form of electoral outreach. While doing so, they ended up forming relationships with people who were not necessarily within the Socialist Party's bubbles, such as labor leaders Cindy Hillman and David Dubinsky, who wanted to sway them into joining the Democratic Party to help Roosevelt in the upcoming election. However, the Old Guard was still really hesitant to back the Democrats, mostly due to the fact that the party was a vehicle for Southern segregation. However, after some hefty debate, they did manage to reach a compromise, creating a brand new political party called the American Labor Party, a party that was intended to be a vehicle for social democrats and trade unionists intended to model the British Labour Party. Now some of you might be wondering, how the heck does this help Roosevelt? Well, New York has this thing called fusion voting, where a candidate can be nominated by multiple political parties, with each of them getting a ballot line, with the idea being that these Old Guard socialists who are hesitant to vote for Roosevelt on the Democratic Party line would vote for him on this secondary ballot line, hopefully using this momentum to push him further to the left. Naturally, the party would nominate Roosevelt as their presidential nominee, and also decide to give their ballot line to incumbent governor Herbert H. Lehman. Roosevelt managed to get 274,924 votes, while Lehman got 262,192 votes, which meant that the party was able to officially become registered, which gave them the ability to register voters and run candidates of their own, thus proving their experiment to be a success, which made the ALP a new force in politics, a force that would be reckoned with. Now that the ALP was becoming a viable party, all of a sudden, everybody wanted a piece. Basically anybody who was to the left of the Democratic Party, be it progressive Democrats, social democrats, socialists, and yes, even some communists, were vying for control of the party. Which led to a little bit of a problem. Minor parties, especially newer ones, need a central figure to be their voice. Take other left-wing parties of the time period. Socialists had Norman Thomas, and communists had Earl Browder. So the ALP felt they needed to have a figure to lead them. Thankfully, New York was filled to the brim with social democratic to socialist figures, so all they needed to do was pick one with a lot of name recognition that also maintains the core message of the party. Thankfully, there was one that was already in office. Mayor of New York City, Fiorello LaGuardia, a progressive Republican who was closely aligned with FDR and labor unions. He also reached a crowd that some people in the ALP might need to broaden their base: minority voters. As such, the ALP endorsed LaGuardia's re-election bid, which he easily won with 482,790 votes on their line, which gave the party more credibility than it had before, giving them some momentum going into the 1938 midterms. And boy did they sure use it, as the American Labor Party made themselves known in all but 4 of the districts in New York, being the second ballot line to 21 candidates and being the primary ballot line for 20 others. In case you're wondering about the discrepancies, one of the seats was an at-large district that elected 2 people. Of the candidates they endorsed, 11 ended up winning, all but 3 being an incumbent. But it mattered little, as when the next Congress came, the ALP's ballot line would mean little, as they would all fold back into their individual parties and... Wait, huh? What's this? It looks like the sole candidate that wasn't
a Democrat
decided to forego his primary party affiliation and go into Congress as a member of the American Labor Party. That person being former one-term Republican Congressman Vito Marcantonio, who was a protege of LaGuardia. Marcantonio would then essentially become the face of the party for his entire congressional tenure. While Vito maintained attention on this front, in the back, things were beginning to shift. While the formation of the ALP was intended to be a vehicle for Social Democrats who, while more radical than FDR, were not as radical as, say, Thomas or Browder, the ALP, targeting the voting bloc of minority voters and trade unionists, opened the door for people who were way more radical to enter the party, leading to accusations that the party was secretly being infiltrated by the American Communist Party. And the first indication that showed some disunity within these factions was during their 1940 convention, when a group of members within the party were actively rallying against giving their ballot line to Roosevelt. While they inevitably still ended up doing it, the fact that there was a faction that was vocal enough in opposing him was a bit of an issue, leading to a schism to form within the party. FDR managed to win 417,418 votes under their ballot line. The following year, the ALP managed to get its second official, albeit an appointment to Comptroller of New York, and really only done to keep the ALP endorsing statewide Democrats, but it was still prominent nonetheless. By the 1944 election, the schism has finally reached its peak, with many more political radicals being involved with the ALP than before, which led to a faction of the party led by George Counts to leave and form a separate political party called the Liberal Party of New York, believing that the ALP was too far gone to the communists. That same year, the Congress of Industrial Organizations Greater New York Industrial Union Council, the CIO's biggest faction, decided to officially affiliate itself with the American Labor Party. While Roosevelt wasn't as affiliated with the ALP due to its supposed radical shift, Vito was all in with his new fellow travelers, beginning to have a very maverick record in the United States House. The first bill to show it was Vito voting against the Smith Act, an act that was built with the purpose of not allowing communists from expressing their views without persecution. Now, despite this more radical faction taking charge of the ALP and a less radical one taking control of the Democrats, the party still gave their ballot line to Roosevelt, who earned 496,405 votes while also sending Vito back to Congress, which showed the party was still hopeful that Roosevelt would be able to continue the agenda that they so desperately approved of. With no major incidents coming up, I'm sure everything will be fine. After Roosevelt died, things got bad. Conserva-Dem Harry Truman could not be any more different than Roosevelt, which wasn't lost on the left wing of the New Deal coalition, most prominently former Vice President Henry Agard Wallace, the guy who would have become president if the DNC did not push him out of the seat, who formed a group called Progressive Citizens of America to pressure Truman to the left. Speaking of pressure, the left also faced its own heap of pressure as the House Un-Americans Committee was voted to become a standing committee in the U.S. House in order to investigate alleged communist influence in America, which was strongly opposed by Marcantonio, which in turn led to some more scrutiny of the American Labor Party, many members of the party leaving over alleged communist influence, either from the U.S. Communist Party, communists not affiliated with the party, or even directly from the USSR itself. Conveniently, no matter what, the party was controlled by communists. It even went so far that on the House floor, Vito and the ALP were accused of being a satellite party.
Political parties created specifically to be controlled by ruling parties in order to fake the democratic process, i.e. controlled opposition.
With U.S. Representative Walter Judd saying, "The history of the Democratic League is astonishingly like that of the American Labor Party, to which the gentleman belongs, It was originally a coalition of labor groups, liberals, and communists. Then the genuine liberals discovered that it and they were being used as fronts or tools of the communists, and, as the gentleman from New York is well aware, they broke off and established the Liberal Party. Another issue that arose for the American Labor Party was the passage of the Wilson-Pakula Act of 1947, an act that would forbid a candidate from running for multiple parties without the express consent of the parties in question. An act that was, for all intents and purposes, targeting the ALP and Vito specifically. And due to this, the ALP had shifted into a more radical direction, going headstrong in an alliance with Henry Wallace to help create a new political party that we all know as the Progressive Party, and effectively serving as their New York faction, which in turn made the hate against them grow, especially when the Communist Party of America started vocally supporting Wallace's bid, which made the hatred grow even more so. Names of Wallace supporters were being published in papers, they were being blamed for a potential Dewey presidency, many members were being investigated by the FBI due to alleged connections with the Communist Party. They basically became bigger pariahs than before. That did not deter the ALP from putting in the groundwork to help Wallace do good in New York, as well as the rest of their candidate slate, one of which was for a special election in the 24th District of New York, which was used as a proxy war for the upcoming presidential election. NYC Mayor at the time, William O'Dwyer, made the plea for Wallace to rejoin the Democrats and help their nominee Karl Popper win. O'Dwyer had won thanks to the ALP supporting him previously, which was met with Wallace holding rallies with the ALP's nominee, Leo Isaacson, which in turn was met with the Liberal Party calling Wallace the next Chamberlain while touting their nominee. Like I said, everybody was using this election as a proxy war, which made it very awkward when Leo Isaacson ended up winning by a massive margin, becoming the ALP's second and last congressman. Why did Leo Isaacson win over the Democratic nominee? While there were not any stances of this at the time, here are the ones that make the most sense. Dissatisfaction with Truman, nostalgia for Roosevelt, the ALP focusing on minority voters, the increased visibility of the race, making people hold the individual candidates to account, his stance on Israel. Regardless, Isaacson ended up winning, which made people worry harder about Truman's chances come November, because the ALP and Wallace had shown that they were more powerful than initially thought, many papers thinking that this was probably it for Truman. Meanwhile, the new ALP caucus was earning some ire thanks to some votes on the House floor, opposing the peacetime draft, opposing the Marshall Plan, opposing the House Un-Americans Committee, among other radical leftist things. And as they grew more radical, the response would also be radical. Leo Isaacson would end up becoming the first congressman to get his passport revoked after Leo tried to head to Paris on behalf of the American Council for Democratic Greece, a left-wing organization that was supported by the Greek communists during their civil war. I wonder if this had anything to do with the fact that the US was backing the other guys in the war. This serving as another example of McCarthyism. As the election approached, the ALP was ready for whatever to happen next. Leo making a speech alongside his allies explaining that should the Democrats fail, it would not be because of them, but rather the failures that the Democrats did to combat the Republicans. When Election Day came, Wallace earned 509,559 votes on the ALP line. Vito Marcantonio would also easily win another term, and Leo sure did give it the college try, making Vito the sole member of the party once more. The party's combined congressional total, however, was 409,789 votes, a slight increase from 1946, and the largest share that the party would get in their history. After all that drama regarding the American Labor Party, Vito was probably the furthest from the rest of the Congress than he has ever been, starting with Vito voting present on the Speaker election despite having supported both of the candidates in the past, while of course maintaining his radical voting record otherwise. While doing so, it seemed that Vito was looking for the door, as while he was in the House, he decided to initiate a bid for the New York City mayor, running against O'Dwyer and a LaGuardia ally named Newbold Morse under the Republican-Liberal fusion line, Vito getting a little under half of Norris's total. to which he would return to Congress, still remaining a pariah. However, the thing that seemed to be a bridge too far was when Vito became a critic of US policy in Korea, arguing the DPRK was attacked by the South, which was seen as the last straw for the American Labor Party. Their fusion strategy was pretty much kaput, having to make the decision to run their first Senate campaign solo. And boy did they choose an interesting first outing, choosing a man by the name of William Edward Burghardt Du Bois to be their nominee, earning a little under 4%. But New York was not the only Senate race that they were involved in, because they were somehow roped into two races on the opposite sides of the nation. We will start in Florida, where the incumbent Senator Claude Pepper was facing a harsh campaign against Representative George Smathers, who had relentlessly painted Pepper as a radical communist due to him not wanting the US and USSR to go to war, and the fact that he was a supporter of Henry Wallace. But it didn't really hit until Smathers pointed out that Pepper and Vito had very similar voting records, and since Vito was the radical communist in the House, he was of course painted more red than he was previously. The California Senate race was no different. Representative Helen Gahagan Douglas was nominated to be the Democratic nominee against a Republican dick that I'll be referring to as Milhouse. Milhouse was well known for being a little bit of a trickster, so he began scheming on a way to guarantee that he would win, and he similarly pointed out the fact that Helen and Vito had similar voting records, to the point where he would hand out flyers that showed a ton of bills that they voted the same on, showing that they had voted the same on 354 bills. It even got to the point where Helen had begun to claim that Milhouse was closer to Vito than she was, which didn't bode well for her either. Now, one major thing that Milhouse neglected to mention was the fact that a majority of those votes were simply Democratic Party bills that Vito voted on, with many of them not even really being policy-oriented. Many of them were procedural votes. But that didn't matter, because that didn't fit in with the narrative that Vito was this extremely radical fringe candidate, and that if Helen won, she will be just like that. And unfortunately, it kind of worked, as both Helen and Claude did not become senators. Now, Vito helped kill two campaigns, but what about his own? Well, this time, the establishment did not pull any punches. The Democrats running a state senator by the name of James G. Donovan, who had also earned the endorsements of the Republican and Liberal Party lines because of the fact that Vito had to run on this ballot line alone, which meant that unfortunately, Vito would end up losing re-election. Korea was a very controversial element, not only on the broader electorate, but even within the ranks of the ALP and its partners, such as 1948 nominee Henry Wallace, who was supportive of the intervention, which caused him to formally disassociate with the party, with many others following suit, either rejoining the Democrats or fleeing to the Liberals, making the ALP seem more radical by comparison. Despite diminishing vote totals, the ALP remained undeterred, continuing to push for the Progressive Party, endorsing their ticket of Vincent Hallinan and Charlotta Bass. Were there any other notable members running with them? Well, there was an activist named Corliss Lamont who was running for Senate, but not too notable though. How about Vito? Well, they ran a Vito, but not the Vito, with Marcantonio taking a little bit of a break from electoral politics to serve as both a presidential elector and the chair of the party, essentially trying to see if he can get this sinking ship back afloat. Hallinan would only get 64,211 votes, Lamont would only get 104,702 votes, and their combined House candidates earned around 95,597 votes, each being a decent drop from the last vote totals, dangerously close to that 50,000 vote threshold needed to remain a political party, with 1954 basically serving as the election that would definitively determine what happens next for the party. However, in between then, there was going to be another election that served as a test for the ALP, and that was the New York City mayoral race. The office that built the party, maybe it could lead to some good results? Well, as a way to try and guarantee that, the party would choose to nominate a prominent candidate and activist named Clifford T. McAvoy to be the nominee for mayor, who had had a decent run in statewide office prior, so maybe he could be able to put that momentum into the race. Well, unfortunately, they did not do so hot. McAvoy only getting 53,405 votes, which guarantees them the spot for now, but that's very dangerously close to that line, which Vito was infuriated by, claiming that communists within his own party had actually sabotaged the ALP's chances, claiming the party was advocating for people to vote for the Liberal nominee instead of their own, which in turn led to Vito not only resigning as chair of the party, but also retiring from the party in general, with the 1954 election looking incredibly bleak. Without their central figure to lead them, the party was kind of just scrambling to figure out what to do next. They did manage to put together a candidate slate up and down the ballot, including but not limited to progressive journalist John T. McManus to be their nominee for governor, blacklisted celebrity Karen Morley for lieutenant governor, and even nominating a perennial candidate by the name of Frank D. Weddle to run for Vito Marcantonio's old seat. Fun fact, Vito Marcantonio was actually planning on running in this seat as well, under a new political party called the Good Neighbor Party, and was actually leaving a printing office with all the necessary petitions ready for him to run for his old seat again, when Vito would suffer a massive heart attack, which would ultimately be the death of Vito. A fate that the American Labor Party would face as well, as their gubernatorial nominee would get 46,886 votes, and their combined congressional total would be 14,560 votes, which was noticeably underneath the threshold to remain on the NY ballot. While the American Labor Party could, hypothetically, file petitions to get back on the ballot by the next election, there really was not any electoral base remaining for the party to get said petitions, as many within the ALP had basically just left to any other political party that would have them. Democrats, liberals, the communists, heck, some even went to the Socialist Workers' Party. So in 1956, the ALP officially deregistered as a party after only 2 decades. And that is the story of one of the lesser known, but still notable, left-wing parties in the United States. So to all of you, oh wait, this party dissolved, I don't have to do that. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, consider supporting me on Patreon.